We've all done it. We log on to a new website and come upon the terms of service agreement, and instead of reading it, we just click agree.
But guess who has time to read all that stuff, even if it is a legally binding contract? The answer is effectively no one, since one study found it would take the average person about 250 hours, 30 full working days every year to read them all.
Seth Stevenson is a senior writer for Slate and recently wrote about the crazy world of end-user agreements. Seth, good morning.
Thanks for having me on.
What ultimately is the purpose of these agreements?
Really, it's to protect the companies. If it was good for you, they would put it in huge fonts on the front of these pages, but instead they hide it in tiny fine print, somewhere you have to click 3 times to find it. So it's to protect them. It's to cover them up and make sure that you can't sue them and make sure that they're not exposed to any legal liabilities.
What I found most fascinating, though, is that you don't even have to necessarily click. If you are scrolling through someone's website, you might have, by default, accepted the terms and agreements.
Exactly. If it says click to agree and you click, for sure, you have agreed, according to the courts. But even sometimes if you're surfing around and just looking at a page, you may be bound by the terms of that page just by being on it. The courts have often found that you're still beholden to what they've put on their terms and conditions page.
I don't know anybody who actually reads this stuff, so what's actually in there?
It depends. It can be some crazy stuff. There was an in-car navigation service that said they could basically spy on anything that happened in your car and report your GPS information to law authorities, where you are at any given time. There was one company that put a clause in saying they could show up at your house at any time in the middle of the night and audit was the term they used, what your possessions basically. Some of these things are absolutely insane, and I think the people who craft them often don't even know what they're putting in there. They throw in everything, including the kitchen sink, just to make sure they're covered in any eventuality.
Are they really legally binding, though? Has anyone actually taken someone to court and said, I didn't mean to agree to that?
Well, that's the problem. One of the things that's in these agreements are these clauses designed to prevent you from suing the companies. So they basically prevent you from doing any sort of class action suit where you take all the consumers who are subject to these agreements and get together and sue the company. Basically, they try to make that impossible to do.
But do they, since they're shaving off some of their costs in terms of protecting themselves on the front end, do we end up getting anything that costs less?
Well, sure. I mean, there are all sorts of services that you probably use, like Facebook or Google Maps. Things like these are free services that a lot of people really enjoy. And if companies had more legal liability and had to pay more in order to protect themselves from those legal liabilities, the services might not be free. So, there is an argument to be made that you would prefer to have a service with you'd prefer to have a website with terrible terms of service, but it's a great service that you enjoy using and it's free, as opposed to just a terrible product that you don't even want to use, but it's got terrific terms of service. That doesn't really help you out anyway.
Some of these agreements are ridiculously long. The Apple iTunes contract, for example, is 55 pages. It's like 30 feet when you splice it together. I mean, do they really expect you to read these things, and will the courts actually uphold them?
Nobody reads these things. Even the people I talk to who craft these agreements, the lawyers who make them, they don't read them. If you did read them, you wouldn't understand them because they're in legalese that the average person can't make heads or tails of.
But they're legally binding?
They're still legally binding. We've gotten ourselves in a crazy situation, and no one I talked to could really see a way out of it.
We have to ask you about the one guy who actually did read one of these, and it had a reward tucked inside the end-user agreement.
Yeah, so one of these software companies hid a little clause deep in its terms of service agreement that said, the first person who sees this, just write to us, and we're going to give you, I think it was $1,000. And it took months and thousands of people, clicking through and agreeing to the agreement before anyone pointed it out, which just goes to show that nobody's looking at these things.
Make us think twice before we click yes. Seth Stevenson, thank you so much.
Thank you.